Welcome to Curious Goldfish, a podcast community where music and curiosity come together through interesting conversations with the music makers of our world. I'm your host, Jason English. You can find Curious Goldfish in all the major podcast and social media platforms, and of course, we have all of our content on our website, curiousgoldfish.com. Hey Siri, I really appreciate your time. Happy Thursday, I think it is. How's it going?
Going good. Yeah, stoked to be here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. So it's the fall. I think you're kind of in the middle of some shows, and your new album came out this spring. I guess like 6 months after an album is out, is the touring kind of what you're focused on right now, or are you kind of already thinking about kind of your next?
I'm pretty focused on touring for now, just in the fall. And then the year will quiet down. And I think winter is just a natural time to hibernate and work on new things. So it's not far away to kind of like shift focus, but want
Yeah,
to see this album release cycle through and yeah, just celebrate the music. It's been a fun year. So
awesome. And
yeah.
hibernation is probably the right term since you live in Minnesota, so that's good.
Yeah, yeah, definitely hoping for some hibernation this winter. Feet of snow,
Yeah.
ideally.
So what, I guess the album's been out 5 or 6 months. I guess what's the general feedback? I'm sure it's all great, but is there a song or a theme that's kind of resonating more with people that you're picking up on?
Hmm. Well, Right On is an album that's a little bit of a departure for the band as a whole. It's a little grittier, a little more rock influenced as opposed to like ethereal folk music. So I think that's kind of like the biggest like feedback we get is from people who've been like seeing us perform for years who are like, wow, this is louder. um but it's great. We're having a blast playing that music. It's been really refreshing actually, but definitely a little bit more direct lyrically as well. And yeah, we get mixed feedback actually. I think there are some people who just want to have a nice time and listen to like easy music, and I can appreciate that. I think there's a time for that, but that's not really what our shows are about. And they never have been.
Hmm.
So sometimes when I get interesting feedback at the merch table or whatever, it's sort of like, "Oh, I don't think you really got what we were doing anyways," and
Okay.
everyone's entitled to their opinion, but yeah, it's kind of fun to just turn up the amps and get weird and
Yeah. And I
yeah,
think I
see
think
where
you've
we end
told
up.
somebody that when you wrote all this, it kind of came from a place of anger. Are you still kind of
Yeah.
working through that?
Mm, Anger is such a funny emotion. It like comes and goes. It like really rears its head. I'm sure you know that in your own way. I feel like we all do, whether we acknowledge it or not. But I'm actually generally not a very angry person. I think I was angry for a many reasons and continue to be, but to sort of sit with that emotion and recognize that it can be really mobilizing and it's a sign of care and social investment to be angry about things when you see how they could be improved or how they've been built to fail. So, yeah, that's very much part of the album, and I try to stay balanced and not be thinking about it all the time, but it's cathartic to
Right.
sing about and connect with other people about it at shows for sure.
Well, we're not going to get into politics necessarily, but you mentioned like direct lyrics, and I know that some of this has stemmed from there in Minnesota with what happened with George Floyd, right? But we're in the middle of an election cycle, and I guess my question is, does it feels like this election cycle feels a little bit different just from a artist? It just doesn't seem like people are as vocal as they may have been 4 years ago. It just, and I asked some people this in Nashville at Americana Fest recently, and yeah, it just feels like, I don't know if it's apathy or if it's like, I don't know what it is. Do you feel that, or am I like totally off there?
No, I don't know. I feel like it's so hard to have a read on what's actually going on around us because we're all in such bubbles these days. I feel like being a touring musician is actually a pretty interesting perspective just because you see a lot, you pass through a lot, you stop in a lot of places. And ultimately, like my takeaway is that the opposites are true. And like they're happening all the time. Like you can say one thing about one community, like they're really engaged. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening here. Like we can learn so much from how these people are organizing. And then you like go to the next town and it's like, whoa, the opposite is true. And we're not even 50 miles away.
Hmm.
So I think more than anything in this window of time, I feel more like humble
Hmm.
than anything of like I have my belief systems, I have my values, and they're very much within a framework of the local is global. And I wonder if that's like a thing for a lot of younger folks as well. It's just the disenfranchisement within the systems and focusing on what you can actually do, which is a quieter process in some ways, but
Right.
that's just my impression. I don't even know.
Okay. Well, I know that as news cycles typically work, right? The George Floyd thing obviously was national, international headlines, and that caused a lot of follow up with actually corporations and organizations trying to be more aware and more open to all those issues that that brought to the forefront. Where
Mhm.
you're at, have things changed or improved on that topic, like there in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota? Because I obviously think people move on when it's not local, right? So I'm just
Mhm.
curious, like, have you seen a kind of a more lasting legacy there?
Yeah, I think with those events that really ripple through a community and, have a lot of um, after after effects or aftershocks, I think that legacy is, you know, we'll just continue to see how things change. I think from my perspective, that in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder and in the aftermath of the uprisings, there was a lot of hope, at least in the neighborhood I was in, for lasting change, revolutionary change in the sense of reimagining what it means to be neighbors, to be in a city, to be Americans. And I think that on the whole it can be really frustrating and saddening to see how slow that change really can be. But then there are those events also a lot happens. So I feel like I'm not really educated enough
Mm.
to have an eloquent answer on it, but I think it's something that I am talking about more often with friends, family, and strangers than I did before, and I think that's important, but the mountain to climb is still very much there. And
Right.
kind of coming back to what we were in your previous question, just having sort of a humble attitude of
Mm.
like, I'm a learner, I'm often wrong, I believe in this, and like continuing to show up for it is what's most important. And um, yeah, that sort of like knee jerk reaction of wanting to do big things quickly in response to crisis. I feel like that was one response to have, and I definitely had that in my own way, but as time has gone on, trying to find sustainable ways to
Right.
continue to show up. Yeah, for the change that hasn't happened yet.
Right. Well, like I mentioned, I have a day job, and so in corporate America, right on the heels of all that, there was a lot of action, and it's definitely died down in terms of taking time to address some of those issues. So, and I know some companies have actually sort of deprioritized that whole diversity and inclusion, equality sort of roles that they hired, on the heels of that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's just interesting.
Totally. Well, and if you're whether you're a corporation or an individual, if what you're doing is just performative, then
Right.
it's not actual change either. And I feel like it's yeah, as time goes on, um, yeah, people and places have a way of revealing what their true intentions were,
Yeah.
for
No, for
sure.
sure. All
Yeah.
right, so we're gonna probably popcorn a little bit around like important,
Great.
very deep topics, and then some music,
Yeah.
music stuff. But so I mentioned Americana Fest. I think you were just there, and I think you
Mhm.
posted something on Instagram that I needed to ask you about because you're like, "Oh, it's great to be back in Nashville, even though all these weird things have happened to me in, in Nashville." Like, can you tell me one thing that's happened that's semi humorous or hopefully not dangerous?
Yeah, well, I think that our band history our it's like it's not super unique by any means, it's just that we were DIY for so long, And only in the last couple years have we been working with like actual industry people who are very knowledgeable and talented and have like really helped us along the way. But the 7, 8 years before that, we were like just in the van playing in basements and random bars and doing our best to just like make the best music we could. And so whenever we came to Nashville, we just like the first time I was ever there, we played at a biker bar and had like just the most intense time ever. I think we were also about 4 weeks into a tour and it was like over 100 degrees and it was just
Gosh.
twilight zone. And we didn't see any of the like cliche parts of Nashville. It's like we could have been anywhere on the planet, but we were just in a biker bar sweating and like maybe in the early stages of heat stroke playing a show. Um so that yeah, that was a weird time.
Mm.
And I mean, Americana Fest is weird in its own way. It's such a strange concept. I think I can see why it's important and it's so like helpful to have a lot of people all in the same place.
Yeah.
But it's so industry focused and I
Mm.
feel like that's not really my story
Mm.
and many artists I think feel like fish out of water in a place like that even though it's like all apparently all about the music.
Right.
It's just interesting to like sit with the contradictions and it's not good or bad, it's
Yeah.
just weird.
Well,
And I definitely feel that way in Nashville.
yeah, no, for sure. And because you're pretty active, since you started doing music at like Folk Alliance, and then, we had talked about 30A, and there's a really cool festival I think you attended in Appleton, Wisconsin, that's got this whole thing
Yeah,
going. So like, yeah, I guess they all have their own kind of role and personality,
totally.
right?
Yeah, it's an interesting community web. It's like business meets friendship and there's a lot of gray space and you get to hear amazing music. So, no complaints,
Yeah.
but I think also it's important to honor the fact like this is a really weird thing that we've all invented and are participating in right now. Just to remind ourselves.
Right. Right. Well, one thing
Yeah.
is, you deserve all the credit because you go on a fair number of podcasts. So like being able to, for me to talk to somebody like you is incredible.
Oh,
It's an honor,
yeah.
and then, us podcasters. I don't even know. That's weird to call myself a podcaster, to be honest. But
You are. You're doing it right now.
um, but it's, to your credit, you take the time to talk to different people, right?
Mhm.
I find really fascinating. And you've been very open about sort of your background and your upbringing. I think your dad was like a trial lawyer, and your mom obviously has a really interesting history as being a preacher, right? And is it the Lutheran Church?
Mhm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, good guess.
yeah. Did you ever? Was there ever a moment where you were like, okay, that's what I want to do, or was that never an option for you, like personally?
I never wanted to be a preacher. I think any preacher's kids who are listening or that I talk to, it's like it's a very specific thing. It's like you're called a PK,
Right.
and you really see behind the curtain of like what makes a religious community work or not work. And I really admire what my mom does, and being like a leader in a spiritual setting is not for the faint of heart by any means. And there are a lot of overlaps actually with music,
Hmm.
but unlike being a musician, you're like really responsible for your congregation and life happens to people. So I grew up with a mom who did an amazing job of raising 4 kids, but if someone's in the hospital or someone passes away or just these people going through like the worst times in their life and they call their pastor. So yeah, I didn't ever idealize what that would mean. But yeah, I did think I wanted to be a lawyer for a little bit and
Oh,
then I
okay.
worked at a law firm for a couple summers and I was like, "Oh, never mind."
I don't see
I just like
you.
reading and
I,
writing, and my dad was always like, "Those are like the most important skills for being a lawyer. Like you might be good at it." And who knows if I think I would have been awful at it actually, but yeah, just being a little administrative assistant, I was like, "Uh-uh.
no.
No way."
I mean, I don't really know you. I think I know you though through your music. I don't see that at all. So I think I think
Yeah.
where you are where you are supposed to be for sure.
I definitely feel very lucky and grateful to play music. I think it's a weird job, but it's like the best ever. So
Yeah.
I lucked out.
That's good. So I guess continue on the church theme, just because this is really interesting for me. So I've talked to a fair number of people this year. They grew up in the church, but it's primarily Southern Baptist or probably more conservative, right, than the Lutheran. When you're out like at these festivals and talking with artists there or whatever, do you feel a connection like spiritually and religiously with them, even though your mom's the pastor and that would never happen in most of these people's church and upbringing, or is it so different that you don't like there's not a connection there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can always find connections. Like the people that I have been able to have like true heart to hearts with who grew up in the church, there's totally overlaps and things to talk about, but mostly I think so many people have really traumatic experiences growing up in the church that I find that I do a lot of listening
Mm,
because when people are sharing those stories, you just want to hold the space and navigate whatever chapter they're in now of that process. And I feel like in my own reflections, I'm just really, I mean, it's like the luckiest thing ever to have grown up in a progressive, open, spiritual community because I think it really taught me how to ask questions, taught me how to listen, taught me the importance of stories. And it also was a community of people who really lived and breathed the ethos of loving your neighbor, which is incredible. And I, it's true of every religion. There's fundamentalist extremists on one end, and then there's people who are just quietly showing up and providing a lot of lightness and goodness in the
mm,
world. And I didn't really appreciate where I had come from until I left it and was hearing stories from other people and started to realize like, wow, this is so rare. Even I'm not even part of the church anymore. It's just this sort of fabric that I grew up inside of that
right,
was empowering
right.
as opposed to suffocating and oppressive. And I wish everyone had a spiritual community that empowered them. I think that would be a beautiful thing. Seems a long ways off, but I think that music communities can, fill that gap in some ways, not all the way, but
Um,
that's part of why I believe in music as a listener and a performer, is I think that it provides a lot of what we're missing as social beings. But yeah, that's like a whole can of worms.
well, no. So when I was thinking about that question, I didn't back to the trial lawyer. I didn't mean to lead the witness, right? But
Oh, you're
what?
fine.
Well, but when I was like, okay, I'm going to ask this question. I hope that you were gonna kind of go there because the word traumatic comes to mind. It's crazy how many people are like still dealing with stuff from
Oh,
like
yeah.
very strict whatever adjective you want to use, and I can tell just from your other interviews and your music that like there's not a weight over you either based on that part of your part of your life. I mean, obviously everybody goes through stuff, but so I,
Mm-hmm.
I thought you might answer it that way. So thank you for kind of confirming what I thought, because it's a real thing with a lot of people that are in like Americana, country,
Mm-hmm.
bluegrass, folk. It's
Yeah.
there's a lot of that PTSD that is reflected in
Yeah.
their music.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's a powerful, healthy place to, or hopefully healthy place for people to process. But yeah, I always feel a little funny, like I feel like I'm in the corner being like, there are groups of people who are curious about the mysteries out there. And it doesn't have to be culty, it doesn't have to be brainwashy. It can just be like your neighbors. It does exist, even if it's rare,
Right,
which I think should be said that it's out
right,
there.
right.
Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned curious again, based on your background. I think you were probably encouraged to be open and curious, and ask questions. I think you mentioned that. I guess at this stage in your life, what are you most curious about?
Hmm. I love this question. What am I curious about? Well, I feel like this is a really boring answer, but as someone who's pretty much lived on the road for the last decade, I've lately been so curious about like handyman projects. I'm like on YouTube, like watching, like, I don't know how to use a drill. I do now because I recently learned, but there's like all these things that I feel are really useful skills that it seems like everyone around me knows how to do, and I just missed it. I've been adulting like with my eyes closed or something. So lately I've been, yeah, curious about how to build things, how to even like cooking and stuff, just things that you would maybe do if you were home regularly and you just slowly get better at. I realize I'm in my early 30s and like my best bet if you came over for dinner is a quesadilla. That's what I would make. So I'm just like trying to learn the domestic magician work that everyone else seems to have a handle on. I'm really curious, like, how do you use a weed whacker? What happens if I just paint this dresser with any paint I find? Like, just I've been making some like mistakes and having fun. But yeah, I'm really curious to learn more, especially with woodworking. It's kind of a weird answer, but that's so
No,
cool
I
what
love.
people.
Yeah, I love that answer. Yeah, no, that's cool. Are you preparing for domestic life as a mother potentially, or like what's triggered this? Do you think?
I'm not. I mean, I moved to a new house with my partner, so I think whenever you're in a new space and you're kind of looking around and trying to figure out what would make it cozy and fun and quirky, yeah, you're like drawn to those things maybe, but I also have been home a little bit more than I have in a really long time. Like even a few weeks at home is kind of a strange thing for me. So I've been learning a lot about like routines and
Okay.
a reasonable bedtime and what it means to cook and say you have a project, you could actually have time to do it. Those are things that I have not ever invested any energy into.
Right.
If I'm an adult and I don't know how to eat well, might not last long. So I'm
No,
trying to figure out the kind of basic stuff. That's what I'm curious about.
I love that answer. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. And you've also talked about the importance of stories and storytelling, and I think for me, in again the day job that I have, even in whatever is technology or sales, like storytelling, they should that should be a class like in middle school. It should be a class in high school.
Yeah.
Should
Yeah.
be a major in college, right? I guess where did
Yeah.
your interest in sort of I would say obsession is probably like the wrong word, but where did your
Mm,
interest about
no, it's the
stories?
right word.
Where do you think that was born from?
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, well, it's hard because stories are like coming at us all the time in ways we're aware of and ways we aren't. I think that I grew up in a house where storytelling was like that was probably one of the most prized
Yeah,
skills. I think both my mom and my dad, my siblings, like they're all amazing storytellers and they really valued like the family dinner at night. So there was a lot of family gatherings where stories were told and retold over and over again. And like facts were like kind of important but not super super important. And then I also was just obsessed is the right word with fairy tales growing up. And that just like never went away. It just broadened. So started learning some of the Irish ballads, the traditional American ballads, and some of them are fairy tales and or mythology, or it all kind of weaves together. And then before long was into folklore and just like the smaller scale, more local legends. I've just been consistently so into that, and I studied it as a undergraduate student and did a fellowship about that.
yeah,
And now if you listen to the Humbird music, like it's very much a part of it. So I think more than anything, I've just been really consistent. I realized I liked it at a young age and I've just really stuck with it.
yeah,
And I think it's a force that is used for good, and it's been used for some like truly horrific things as well. Like it's not this inherently great thing. It's a powerful thing, and I feel like the more you learn about storytelling, the more you actually are aware of how propaganda is a form of storytelling, history is a form of storytelling,
Yeah.
the newspaper is storytelling. Just like not to go all fake news about it, but you're always hearing it from somebody's perspective. And the more you're thinking about that and the more educated you are around the tricks of the trade of
Hmm.
storytelling, I think the more discerning you can be as a consumer
Okay.
and participant.
That's
I
awesome.
don't know. I don't want to go off on too long of a rant about that, but
No, it's
yeah, I
cool.
think it's everything.
Yeah, no, it's great. Well, so I need to ask you. I think you've also said, you kind of grew up with Michelle Branch and Avril Lavigne and some of those sort of strong female women singers,
Hmm.
songwriters, et cetera. But like you've paid homage to, I think, some great storytellers that are mostly men, right? So John
Yeah.
Prine, Willie Nelson, Bob Dylan. So I think
Yeah.
do you think there's a correlation there, or like why you're kind of paying homage to those artists? Does that stem from the stories and the importance of storytelling in your in your life?
For sure. I mean, I feel like those three men you just mentioned are some of the storytellers that shaped our modern culture and especially music today. But I also feel just from an aesthetic standpoint, part of why I've released songs paying homage to those artists is I feel like those are some of the artists I love to cover. I often don't cover women's songs
Right.
because
Yeah.
I'm like, well, they did it. They did a great job. But sometimes it's like way more interesting to hear a very different voice covering Johnny Cash or Willie
Hmm.
Nelson or whoever it is because it's a totally different, you can just hear it in the quality of someone's singing voice that they're coming at it with a different lived experience. And I just feel like it's kind of compelling for reimagining a song. So that's often why we don't really cover women
Yeah.
because I'm like, oh, I don't need to cover Joni Mitchell because I'm not as good as her.
Right.
So we'll just let Joni fly and appreciate it. And then we'll find the songs that maybe haven't been sung by a woman in any like popular sense and like lean into it and try to reimagine it.
And you just released a couple of covers of Billy Joel, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Speaking of which,
same
right?
same thing.
Yeah. Why'd you pick Vienna and So It Goes?
Um, those were 2 songs this year that found me when I really needed them, and I didn't even realize they were Billy Joel songs. Like, I heard them on the radio and was like, "What is this? This is so good." And then found out they were Billy Joel songs. I was like, "Oh, I didn't really think I was a Billy Joel fan, but dang, that song is amazing." And then just sitting with them and learning it, which is generally what I do when a song catches your ear like that. Just
Right.
gotta, like, sit down and learn it and figure out, like, what do they do here? Why is this so emotive? And yeah, and then just the idea to, like, reimagine the songs with my bandmates in a more sort of like progressive rock and roll or like
Mm.
experimental vein just because Billy Joel is so like piano heavy, for good reason, but it
Yeah.
seemed like there was a lot of room to experiment, and that's always a compelling place to go as a band.
So so the Right On album came out in the spring, right? And we talked a little bit about it earlier about kind of the feedback and the grittiness and the difference in sound. I guess it's I think your third album, third original album. I guess with that being kind of out in the world, where do you think you are as an artist today, and then where do you think you want to be?
Hmm. um I kind of have no idea where I am as an artist ever. um it's just such a weird thing to contemplate because I feel like all of our self-awareness is actually way lower than we realize
Hmm.
sometimes. um, I think right now me and my bandmates are in a really exciting place. Like we've never sounded better, we've never had more fun than we are right now. It's just like it feels like a really special time as an ensemble. I just think like every show there's a lot of laughter, and it's so fun to like decompress after of like, oh my gosh, that solo you took, or like how, like what even happened in that one. There's a lot of improvisation in our sets, so it's every night generally is a curveball, but we have a lot of fun with it. So I think that's maybe one answer to that question is really integrated
Mm,
into a collaborative relationship with some of my best friends, and I'm excited to see where we go. I don't have a plan. I think we will continue to try new things, which is sort of a boring answer, but I don't think we like fit super cleanly into any genre, and even though we sometimes do get pressure to lean one way or another, I don't think that's in the cards for us, and in some ways I don't really care. I would like the music and the work to be sustainable, of course, but
right.
um, it feels more important to do something different
Mm,
and something meaningful. And I'm never quite sure what the next bend in the river is going to be, but yeah, so far so good. I look back on what we've done as a band and I'm really proud of us. We've been like a really scrappy crew of people who've like somehow managed to like keep going and keep making music
yeah,
and meeting people and getting to see new places. So we're just going to keep rolling with that.
I love that. That's great. Uh, well, thank you for sharing that. I guess in the Right On album, some of the themes I wrote down just again in reading the lyrics and listening, resilience and acceptance with the title track Right On, and maybe Blueberry Bog,
Yeah.
nature as a healing force, right? So
Mhm.
the one of the best titles of all time, Cornfields and Roadkill, and then songs for the seeds, right?
Yeah.
And then inner conflict and reflection with childhood violence in the quickest way. I guess, am I tracking to kind of what you would consider like the headlines of some of those major themes are?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and those themes are like consistent in all Humbird recordings, I
Yeah.
think. There's just different ways of like coming at it, different angles. It's almost like like I sort of feel like no matter what your art form is, we're all like sculptors in some
Mm,
sense, and it's like you're just watching different artists come at the same themes that are just they can't quite figure out or they're just still chewing on it, so like why not come at it from this side or from up here or down here. That's some of my favorite stuff to witness another artists do. So I've never been too worried about reinventing the wheel as far as themes go with
right.
my writing. It's just
Yeah.
been like, oh, we'll just look at it from this side now.
So you landed on 9 songs for the album. Did you start with double that, or did you start with 12 and come down to 9? Or because I know some artists are like, well, I had 40,
Yeah,
in my bag of tricks, and I'm like, how do you do that? By the way, so like, is this kind of the 9 that's always kind of been there, and that's like, okay, this looks like an album, or was it a different process than that?
it was different. I go in like spurts of writing, and I write a lot when I do write. Like I'm not in a spurt of writing right now. Like I haven't written a song in a while, but yeah, I think I just have a song vault, and that's where all the voice memos
Mm,
go, and I knew I had been writing some harder songs, like harder in the sense of like louder and like amplified and distorted and stuff. But there's a lot in the vault, a lot of it's trash too. Like I'm not saying it's all good, but
yeah.
I think I sold or I didn't sell. I put some songs in like a Google Drive folder, maybe like 30 or 40, and I sent them to my bandmates and was like, "Do you guys like any of these?"
That's cool.
And then
That's
we all
cool.
kind of like zeroed in on the ones that as a group we were like most excited to make. But yeah, there's like 100 more where that came from, and some of them are really, really bad. So I feel like I hate throwing around numbers because then it makes it sound like I'm so productive, but it's no. Some of them are the dumbest songs you can even imagine, but they're
Yeah.
in there. I save it
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
So
Do you
yeah.
guys write together, or is it primarily you?
It's primarily me, but sometimes there's collaborative
Yeah.
songs. On the Right On album, there's one that me and my bandmate Pat wrote together. It's called Fast Food.
Okay.
It's towards the end of the album. But we were just stranded in Iowa during a snowstorm on tour once. We were in this VHS library surrounded by headless mannequins, and it was like, well, let's just write a song because we feel crazy.
As you should. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that was a fun one. It's always cool when a co-write makes it into the studio because it's someone else's song too. I
Yeah.
I love I love that. I just
Yeah.
happen to write mostly alone, but it's
Okay.
so special when it does happen.
Well, because we kind of like having jokes and laughter about Nashville a little bit in the biker bar, but
Mhm.
I've talked to people that live in Fort Worth. I've talked to people that live in Georgia. I've talked to people that live in Brooklyn, and
Yeah.
I'm interested because Nashville, things happen in Nashville that they don't happen otherwise. I mean, do you miss the fact that, and maybe you don't miss it because I don't think you ever lived there, but that's one of the big things is like you can write songs with like pretty much anybody that you run
Yeah.
into. Like, is that something that you are desiring at any point? Or
I'm pretty good with how I do it now. I feel like who knows in other chapters of life, like things change, but I've done a lot of co-writing with people all over the country
Mhm.
just over Zoom
Okay.
or when I'm with them, like cuz I get around on tour. So it doesn't have I would love if it happened more cuz it is really great to make it happen, but I also think it's nice to be out in the world and see a bunch of different things and like fit it in. I feel like the songs are better. I've always been kind of suspicious of the idea of like a bunch of songwriters in a room together making the next hit. Like it happens all the time. It definitely works, but
Right.
are those the best songs?
Right.
Are those like really reflective of the world or are they someone's imagination of what the world is? I'm just kind of suspicious of that stuff and
Mhm.
not to belittle anyone's work because I think just there's different things for different people, but
Sure.
I've always been like wanting to be out there as opposed to safe and comfy and imagining what someone else wants to hear out in the world. That
Sure.
just seems a little weird to me.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right. Well, so what can people look forward to kind of the rest of this year and then next year? I know you said you don't like to make plans necessarily, but is there anything on the horizon that fans of Humbird can be on the lookout for?
Yeah, we're gonna be releasing a ton of new music starting like next month. I don't know really how much more I can say, but it's a really weird project that's different than anything we've done before, but it's pretty lighthearted and goofy. So I'm excited to like just put something it's yeah. There's like I think there's a time for music that really makes you think and reflect and grow. And then I think there's a time to also be light and
Mm.
add some lightness. And man, the world is so heart wrenching right now. So we're gonna put out some silly love songs and just go with that.
Okay.
Yeah, later, later on in the fall,
All right. Well, that should be
doing
cool.
some new
Well,
stuff.
yeah, keep doing what you're doing, and really appreciate your music and really appreciate your time. So
Absolutely.
thank you, Siri.
Yeah, thanks for your thoughtful questions. Super appreciate it.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate it. And have fun in Colorado. Uh,
Will do.
and,
We're
and
excited.
yeah, that's an awesome place to play. So, all right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Siri.